Morning PS 155 scholars. This is Miss Hanley. Today in reading, I am going to be teaching you about point of view. Let's get started. Today the learning target is I can determine point of view. So what is point of view? In realistic fiction, the point of view is how the narrator or the person telling the story thinks or feels about the characters or events in the story. As we continue the lesson, this is going to make more sense to you. But the first thing we have to differentiate between or realize the difference between is point of view and narration. So the narrator is the person who is telling the story. In order to find the point of view, you need to know who the narrator is. So the point of view is how the person telling the story or the narrator feels about the characters or events. So you're going to see these pictures a lot today because I'm going to be talking about both point of view and narration. So we're going to start with narration because in order to find the point of view, you first must find out who the narrator is. So how do we find out who the narrator is? To determine the narrator of a story, students should look at pronouns, okay? So if you see pronouns like I, me, or us, this shows that the story is told by a first-person narrator. A first-person narrator is a character in the story. They are there, they are living it. Okay? If you see pronouns like he, she, or they, that indicates or shows that the story is told by a third-person narrator. A third-person narrator is outside of the story looking in. So that's why there's a little telescope there, because when you are a third-person narrator, you are on the outside of the story looking in. So let me show you examples of both so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to read this story over here that is told from first-person narration. The narrator is in the story. As I walked into my apartment, I put the groceries down. I patted my pocket and realized, oh man, I lost my wallet. I started to retrace my steps in my head. So in this first-person narration, I see pronouns like I and my. That tells me the person who is telling the story, the person who is narrating, is in the story. Now, if I look at this story and it's the same story from the third-person narration, it's going to sound a little different. Juan walked back into his apartment and put his groceries down. He patted his pocket and had a worried look on his face. So I am seeing pronouns like his and he, and that tells me that this narrator is outside looking in on the story. That is third-person narration. Now, once you understand who is narrating the story, you can determine the point of view or how that narrator feels. So like I said before, a first-person narrator is in the story. That means that we get to know the thoughts and feelings of that character. For a third-person narrator, they are outside the story looking in. So we actually get to know what all the characters are thinking and feeling. Okay, so major difference. Narration is the person telling the story. The point of view is how that narrator feels. So today you are going to get to reread that story, Remembering Hurricane Katrina. And before I explain what you're going to do, I wanted to address a misconception or something that we were a little confused about. In the story, Hector starts remembering or having a flashback about Hurricane Katrina, and he talks about families living in the dome. So this is a picture of a dome, and a dome is another word for a stadium. So when you go to watch really big soccer games or football games or baseball games, you go to a stadium. And another word for a stadium is a dome. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, a lot of people lost their homes and needed somewhere to stay. So instead of using the stadium for fans and for sports, they turned it into a place where all the people could live. So if you look at this picture, these are actually rows of bed and people were living in the dome. Okay? While you read Remembering Hurricane Katrina today, I want you to first pay close attention to the narration. So is the narrator in the story? First person narration? Or is the narrator outside the story, third person narration? Once you determine the narrator, then you can determine the point of view or how the narrator feels. Thank you for listening and do a great job on your assignment. Make us proud.